Michael Smith. I'm a member of the Committee for Open Discussion of Zionism. I want to thank you for watching and tell you how you can help us. We had a big victory in getting Joel Kovel's book unbanned. That came right after, you may remember, Rachel Corrie play in New York was suppressed. Joel's book was banned. We got it unbanned. Our second big victory is being on TV here today. Our third victory is going to be, with your help, getting this program sent out around the country, rebroadcast, distributed on DVDs. We can do that with your help. You can go to our website, codz.org, and find out how you can join in and work with our committee and help us. So thank you.
Okay, I think what we're going to do now is I am going to decode these, because it's code Z. I'm going to decode these questions and read them aloud. And if there is no specific address on the question, whoever wishes leaps forward can address it first. If the others of you want to jump in, we'll give you some time to do that. The first question: what do you say to those who say that the majority of Palestinians would vote today for a two-state solution and basic considerations of self-determination therefore require that we endorse this too? Ali.
I'd say that's not true. At least it's very much in question. It's very hard to gauge the opinion of Palestinians when they are so dispersed, when they are under military occupation, when they live under threat in Israel, where free discussion of these issues in Israel can result in a visit from the Shin Bet, the Israeli secret police, as has happened to many Palestinians. Nevertheless, we have some indicators. First of all, the opinion polls that are taken among Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, so that's only among Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, show that support for a two-state solution has rarely exceeded 60% and is now down at around 50% and has been declining steadily. Remarkably low, given that it's Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip who nominally would have the most to gain from a Palestinian state, and remarkably low given the huge industry of people invested in telling us that the two-state solution is the only solution and we're heretics if we think of anything else. When you look at support for a single democratic state or binational state, it varies between 25 and 40% in the West Bank and Gaza, and rising very high given the fact that no major political movement has yet adopted it as their platform. When you look at Palestinian citizens of Israel, that's 1.5 million Palestinians who are nominally citizens of Israel. Overwhelmingly, they say in surveys that they support a state of all its citizens, one in which everyone has equal rights regardless of religion. And this is the underpinning principle of a one-state solution. And then finally, you look at Palestinians in the diaspora, where we don't have systematic surveys. But I, for one, I'll tell you, I go and travel far and wide to talk to Palestinians. I just came back from Australia. That's how far I go. And there is very strong support, I would say, among Palestinians in the United States. In my experience, there is majority support for a one-state solution and overwhelming support for the right of return, which, as Amaya and others have commented, is incompatible with the two-state solution. The two-state solution actually cancels the right of Palestinians to return to their original homes and localities. So I would say it's growing, and we are almost, not there yet, almost at that tipping point.
Anyone else? Kathleen?
I would just like to endorse and confirm what Ali said. My husband and I have traveled quite frequently in recent years to the West Bank. I haven't traveled as widely as Ali in the diaspora, the Palestinian diaspora. But we too found, when we were most recently last year in November, that there is increasing support for one state. This was we were there right before the Annapolis summit, and we found quite a few elite, what I would call elite Palestinians, more or less connected to the establishment, who were totally opposed to one state, said they were, but who were at the moment, at that time, placing great hope in Annapolis. I think even they realized it was sort of a forlorn hope. But among intelligent, educated, grassroots activists, one state was and the right of return, the importance of the right of return was very much mentioned, always.
I'd like, this is sort of an internal question, Charlie. A very important development would be exactly if a Palestinian party or organization enunciated. That's a threshold we have to think about. Obviously, one reason that the majority of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are still talking about two-state is that's the language they've been handed, so to speak. So what do you think the prospects are for the formalization of this embeddedness in a political movement or party?
You know, it's one of the difficult challenges. People always say, well, where is the Palestinian leadership now? Where do we look to for leadership on this issue? And Palestinians are fragmented. Palestinians in Israel have their own leadership. Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza have split leaderships. Palestinians in the diaspora have been orphaned by their leadership. Since the Oslo Accords, we have been abandoned. And so there are not the vehicles for people to speak. But what I see at the grassroots is a real push for this idea to be adopted by various leaders and leaderships. So there is an internal discussion among Palestinians now. It's happening among Palestinians in Israel, where some of those who advocated Israel being a democracy just within the 1948 borders, there is a strong pro-democracy movement in Israel that we need to support and learn about, are now saying, well, we should extend that democracy to the whole territory. Within Hamas, there is a debate. At the Hamas leadership, they've hinted recently, like, well, maybe, you know, we'll support the two-state solution. But that's because they are actively debating amongst themselves, what is our vision? How does it fit with the realities that are there? And Hamas, of course, are always caricatured in the US and Israeli media as these mad people that you can't talk to and who are simply, foaming at the mouth. The reality is very different, that they are a movement that responds to their constituency the same way that any other movement in such a situation does. And that debate is active. And then the split in the West Bank, I think, is largely between the elites who have benefited from the Oslo process and who hope to be the ones who inherit the government and leadership and bureaucracy of the Palestinian state, and the vast majority of Palestinians who have been completely disenfranchised by the peace process and further oppressed and marginalized by it. And so there is where you see the push for alternative thinking. It may be too early even for one movement to say, this is the platform, everyone sign up to it. Maybe we need to go through a process of this broad-based grassroots discussion. But what we need to do is open the doors for that discussion here in the United States and elsewhere so that it can be something that is connected to the work that we're all doing.
But I'm sorry, say one more quick thing. I think this discussion just now has opened the need for something that Amaya said, that if we ever get to the point where a one-state solution or a two-state, where there's actually a need for a choice between them, there must be a referendum among all Palestinians in the diaspora and in Israel and in the occupied territories to determine what Palestinians want. This was made possible during the so-called Iraqi election a few years ago with the purple finger thing, where Iraqis in the United States and elsewhere in the world were allowed to vote, and Palestinians ought to have that right also.
I think also, if I can just sideline my moderator hat for a moment, that I think Ali's comment about we right now actually have a one-state situation extends to the possibilities of a two-state implementation under any resources or vision that would currently execute it. So, I mean, anything that would give us two states at this point, which isn't even that feasible either, would effectively, with Israeli hegemony, be a one-state solution. So, so in a funny way, and I guess that's back to the power to imagine, I mean, the one-state solution is the only one at this point that opens up the possibility for really putting on the table the equality of Palestinians and Israelis before the law. My next question here, the Israeli government intends to keep the settlements they have built on occupied Palestinian territory. Bush has also agreed to honor these facts on the ground. So a two-state solution would cede this territory to the Jewish state or be faced with evacuating 500,000 unwilling settlers. How would a one-state solution deal with this land and other land and property stolen from Palestinians? Joel.
With difficulty. It's a question of degrees of difficulty and which is the path towards justice. The settlements constitute facts on the ground, and they're put in very deliberately to set forth a kind of inertia so that it'll be very, very difficult to transform Israel. And indeed, that's the case. One of the prime arguments against the two-state solution is that there really can be no two-state solution that eliminates the settlements, because to do so would require such a change in Israel that it would be tantamount to bringing down the Israeli state in the first place. The fact of the matter is that those settlements are illegal. They don't have a right to be there. Even the Israeli Supreme Court says they're illegal. It's a sign of just how bankrupt Israeli society is without a constitution and the like, that the Supreme Court declaration that it's illegal to put these settlements in is just routinely ignored. So I think that, in any one-state solution which proceeds through Palestinian right of return, there's going to have to be a prolonged and protracted set of confrontations, a very difficult set of negotiations, but feasible. And at the end of it, my view is that those settlements will have to be taken down in any circumstance. And not taken, I wouldn't want to live there, would you? They're awful. They take up all the water and the like. They're like they're air-conditioned nightmares, to take a phrase from Henry Miller. And they should, there's something that has to be faced up to, but it's by no means the greatest of our problems. It's something that can be done.
Yeah, I want to also say something about that. I think that we should focus, sorry, not about the land that was taken in 1967, although it's very complicated and important and should be given back. But the most important question is what we will do about the land of 1948 that was occupied and taken, and many Palestinians lost their homes, and there are Jewish that are living now on their land and on their homes, in their homes. I think it's very, very important to deal with those questions because it will be much more complicated. I do think it is possible. I do think it is possible to start mapping what is happening on the ground, how many people do actually live on Palestinian land, because I think that from a very beginning search of it and beginning feeling and walking around the country, it seems that most of the land of the Palestinians was not populated in a sense that it still that it was declared as resorts or as or was being planted by different kinds of forest. This kind of this is another kind of occupation, but it's still like the land is there without being have to force people out of it, Jewish people out of it, and still. There will be, so I think that when we are dealing about the solution, we have to deal with the 1948 land, and the principle should be not doing another harm or to causing another injustice, like a circle that will never end, but there will be a negotiation. There will be for sure Jewish people that will have to leave their homes, and so Palestinians can get their lands back, or there will be some kind of compensation. It will be a long and I'm sure painful process, but it is possible because the basic foundation of it is negotiation. And I think it's very important to acknowledge the myth that inside the 48 or 49 borders, whatever you want to call it, most of the Palestinians' land is, I would say, is not populated, is not being used as in to live. It just mainly it's like what I said, forests, national parks, and agricultural land. And I think first step is to map those stuff, is to start realizing what we are talking, not just on the somewhere up there, just to say practically what we can do, what we really can feel, what is happening. And we can talk about a lot of solutions, but we don't have the real details and numbers, and it will help us a lot.
Yeah, I'll just say something on the point of the settlements, that the problem that I think we need to attack in any solution is settler power and privilege. And that, yes, the settlements themselves as physical objects may create some environmental and ecological problems and challenges. But I would argue that the main problem with them is the settler power and privilege. So the solution, as we said in the one-state declaration, there must be just redress for the devastating effects of decades of Zionist colonization in the pre- and post-state period, including the abrogation of all laws and ending all policies, practices, and systems of military and civil control that oppress and discriminate on the basis of ethnicity, religion, or national origin. So what does this mean for the settlements? It means that they no longer remain places of settler privilege and power, exclusive enclaves for Israeli Jews, but they become housing developments for everybody. That might mean that some of them are perfectly suited for the needs of people in the new state on a non-discriminatory basis. It might mean that some of them are totally inappropriate because of how wasteful and poorly planned they are. But that's an assessment that has to be made in the absence of settler privilege. That the bricks and mortar are not the problem. The problem is the settler privilege. And so removing that settler privilege and making just redress for it means a whole range of things, not just with respect to the settlements, but with respect to restitution for all the property stolen in 1948, return. It means ultimately transforming the police and the army from uniformed Jewish sectarian militias into modern democratic police services for everyone. There's a whole range of things that this has to be done with, and the settlements are only part of that.
Can I add just one thing? I think, Ali, I agree with what everyone has said. And I think, first of all, there is a database for the settlements on the website of the Foundation for Middle East Peace, fmep.org, which examines which settlements would be, and in what way would be appropriate for a Palestinian housing, for more integrated housing. But I think to cover all of this, all of what we've all been saying, there will have to be some kind of truth and reconciliation process similar to South Africa's, much more elaborate. It's going to be much more expensive and much, much more painful and much more prolonged than the South African process. But that will be absolutely necessary to work out the 48 territories, what happens there, to work out compensation for Israelis, for the settlers who will move or will have to move, as well as, of course, huge compensation for Palestinians who have been dispossessed for 60 years or only dispossessed for 40 years in the occupation. But some, maybe it would be in the form of Joel's, what was it, World Congress of Israelis, Palestinians, and International Civil Society. Some body to work this out.
Let's just bear in mind that there are two categories of settlers. You all know this, but let's keep it in mind. One category are people who are just there for economic reasons. They're given subsidies, free housing, cheap easy place to live. And the others, of course, are ultra fanatics and pose another order of problem, but one that can be dealt with and will have to be dealt with. That's all.
And if, somewhat along Uri Davis's conception, and I like his term Hebrews instead. I mean, if Israeli Jews chose to live in areas that were predominantly demographically Palestinian, as long as you say, as long as they are willing to abide by the same legal structures and respect for the other and access to resources that would prevail among their neighbors, right? Then, in theory, a one-state solution would not deny Jews the opportunity to live in those places either. Okay, you might actually be able just to take a vote on this question. Israelis fear that if a Palestinian state was created, this would be incentive for Palestinians to demand more land. Wouldn't a movement that openly calls for one state and the return of the refugees have the advantage of honesty and frankness?
Yes.
Any elaboration there, or any disagreement? Okay, there's.
Well, just the point that everything we know about the so-called negotiations that are going on between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, the US-backed part of the Palestinian Authority, as opposed to the elected part, which is imprisoned in Gaza. What is on offer to the Palestinians is about 50% of the West Bank, which translates plus Gaza, which is to remain a permanent prison. But 50% of the West Bank translates to about between 11 and 13% of historic Palestine. And remember, Palestinians are now almost half the population, not even including the refugees outside the country, just those who are inside. So on what basis of justice, in what conception of justice, and I would ask you as a scholar, is there anything in the long tradition of writing in Judaism, which is so focused on justice, where more than half the people are assigned to reservations of 13% of the land? So there's no way that any of the conceptions of a two-state solution could ever be just. And I don't think there's anything in any scripture from any religion or any notion from any democratic and universalist philosophy that could support what the two-state solution is proposing.
One has always to use historical sources carefully, but there is a beautiful 12th century philosophical work called the Kuzari by Judah Halevi, a proto-nationalist Jew, if there ever was one, but a great poet. And in the Kuzari, which is set up as a dialogue among a king who invites a rabbi, a Christian, and a Muslim, and a philosopher, I think, to all present their perspectives on the world to him so that he can decide which is the right way to live. There is a point where he says to the rabbi, you people are not so violent. You do not go around killing other people the way the Christians and the Muslims and the other peoples of the world do. And the rabbi says to him, oh, well, we just don't have the power. So a sad truth. But
for the next session, I want to add something about being truthful and honest with ourselves. I think that what also I came through, and also I see it in Zochrot, is the process that we are more and more honest with ourselves and speak truthfully and openly about what we believe. And it's not an easy process in Israel, as you probably can imagine. And I think that there is prices, of course, but there are much more prices about staying vague and not saying what we believe. And I think that it's very important, especially now, to say directly that we believe in one state and we believe in the return of the Palestinians. For that reason, we are doing a conference on the 23rd of June about the right of return, but about a practical thing of how to bring the right of return in practical measures and practical ideas in Tel Aviv, inside Israel in the most secular Jewish place in the center of Tel Aviv. I think it is a very challenging conference, but it's so important to exactly to this kind of process.
You had resistance?
Of course.
I mean, obviously, that's a rhetorical question, but can you describe some of the resistance?
We probably will see the resistance much closer to the conference, although it's in 3 weeks, but it's still not, it's just in this week will be published in the open public, in all kind of media places and internet. So we probably will see it more loudly, but I'm sure there will be resistance. I'm sure there will be demonstrations against it. I'm sure there will be all kinds of activities. I will glad to inform you afterwards.
And in Haifa, just a brief note, in Haifa in a couple of weeks' time, there's also a conference on a one-state solution. So again, that's within Israel, that discussion is happening.
Yeah, it's very, very important because that group and the Zachot and other groups are doing this kind of a discussion. And I think I do agree that in this point we should have as much a variety and open and many, many places that we can make this discussion.
May I ask Maya a question on that, in that vein? I have, obviously, the discourse is changing in Israel, not fast enough for our satisfaction, but I've also noticed a sort of trend of going, this far toward honesty, rather than this far. People like Uri Avneri, for instance, will, as he did in the debate last year with Ilan Pappé, will acknowledge that a great historical injustice was done to the Palestinians in '48, but that's all he will say. And I think he's actually been asked, does he therefore agree that the right of return is a right to the Palestinians, and he says no. And there was recently an article in Haaretz indicating that there are a few novelists, 30-something young Israelis, young and from my perspective anyway, who are writing novels on what was formerly a taboo subject, that is the Palestinian presence in Israel before '48. But they all, at least in this article, said, but that doesn't mean we agree with the right of return. We think Israel should still be a Zionist state. And I have a friend in my hometown who is an Israeli American who has gone on some of the tours with Zochrot, and she said she cried to realize that her village, her hometown, was built on top of a Palestinian village. But we had a speaker in our town recently who was a Palestinian, was talking about the right of return, and she said to me, but I don't think I can agree with the right of return. So my question, long-winded question, is do you see this kind of attitude as a further wall that obviously it's a wall we have to break through, but is it maybe a sign that people are ready to break through that wall, or is this another impenetrable barrier?
I think it's a sign that it can be break through it, because I see the change during the years. I see that the solution, the two-state solution, was you couldn't speak about it in Israel 10 years ago, and now I think that many of the Israelis do believe that this will be the solution. So I do see the change in things that are going through, and the fact that people can say loudly the phrase right of return is enormous change in Israel. It's not fast enough. It's not where I want that the Israeli society will be, totally not. But I do see the change that is happening. And I believe that it can be brought like this, and that's why, well, I'm a bit disappointed from those novels. I know them, and it's really disappointing because people start to write about Palestinians before '48, which was totally disacknowledged and was totally not being said at all, that there were Palestinians before '48 in the land of Israel. It was totally not, and suddenly people write about it, and but they can't go through this phase. Well, I think it's a phase. I think it will change. Yeah. And I think that what I was saying about the conference, that is, I think, radical, but still can give something to the Israelis, is imagine what will happen after the right of return. If we can imagine it, we can maybe bring it. It will reduce the fear and the tension and the disagreement, but it at least will change something. But if we can imagine it, we can think, okay, we agree or not agree, but at least we can see it. Today in the Israeli reality, it's so difficult even to imagine or think about it. We had an experience with a working group that tried to think how to implement the right of return, how to make it visible, how to make it reality. And it was and in the beginning it was a very productive work, and we studied a lot, and it was a very interesting studying process. But then the process was stuck when we had to think about, okay, what can we do practically? Because the reality is so overwhelming that it's so difficult just to imagine.
Maybe if you still have thoughts, jot them down, because they may recycle with some of these questions. I see they're sort of thematic clusters here. I'm trying to sort so we can try to get to them. Here are three, which I'll truncate, but three on American policy and Israel. Maybe what I'll do is read all three of them, and then you can kind of situate your responses where you wish. One is, there seems to be a symmetry between Israel filling the role of proxy for U.S. foreign policy and American Jews as proxies for Israeli Zionism. And how does that affect any movement that confronts Zionism? The second, these are, obviously, they were not written by people coordinating themselves, but do you see that in our lifetime we might see an elected American politician sitting on a panel for an open discussion of Zionism? Probably if they're not told in advance what they're coming for is my answer. But and three, Israeli government policy is enabled by U.S. subsidy of $3 billion a year. All major party politicians swear fealty to this support. All major commercial media treat this relationship as sacrosanct. How do we knock the pins out from under this unholy tableau? So I think you've got three linked questions really about America, American foreign policy, and internal lobbying.
How do you want to do it? Straight across?
Oh,
You start.
you can start, Joel.
All right. Well, yeah, as we all know, this is ultra critical. I think the notion about proxy is tempting, but it's a little too neat. What we've seen in the U.S. is a very long and convoluted dance, but we shouldn't underestimate the influence that neoconservatives and Christian Zionists have played in the transformation of American foreign policy, particularly in the second Bush administration. And basically you have two bastions of Zionist power in the United States. One is the power of the checkbook and the repressive power of AIPAC, which we saw just the other day with all the politicians for presidency abasing themselves before this heinous organization. But also, and it's not exactly the same, and there are internal divisions within them. You see the growth of the neocons over the last generation, and these are many of them were originally on the left, and they were Jewish. They were New York intellectuals. They were sort of power intellectuals who turned around. I think we have not fathomed what's happened to American Jewry in my lifetime. To see it turn so drastically in the direction of supporting Israel and have these phalanx of neoconservatives who have, they didn't just materialize, they were chosen and selected by Cheney and Rumsfeld. They wormed their way into power. In the Reagan administration, they were eclipsed briefly, they came back. They're fighting maybe their last stand. The question is, will they be on the outs? I don't know. I think that really depends on the degree of struggle that we wage against them. And I think that there's no struggle more vitally important for people in this room and in this country to really take on these lobbies and all of their nefariousness. And that goes both with the way in which the legislature is captive to AIPAC and the way in which the executive has become infiltrated by neocons of various kinds. There are many practical possibilities here. I think one of the most important one remains in forcing AIPAC to change and be known as the lobby of an agent of a foreign power. They've been able to avoid that. There are all kinds of laws on the U.S. books. I mean, maybe you're a very knowledgeable audience, maybe you know this, but it should be pointed out that in the United States you can contribute to the IDF, to the Israeli armies, and take it off your taxes. I mean, can you imagine this kind of collusion and complicity? So each of these things is a beachhead for struggle, and I think as the overall struggle against the Zionist consensus is waged, so must these particular struggles take hold. I think there will be a change. I think that, and I've talked too long about this already, but let me just mention one finding that's very, very important. American Jews were asked whether the disappearance of Israel as a Jewish state would be seen as, quote, an existential blow to them. It would really screw up their lives. And there was a marked falling off according to the age of the participants. American Jews over the age of 60, about 2/3 of them said, yes, it would be a disaster existentially. 50 to 60, about half. Under 45, actually a majority says, no, it wouldn't bother me too much. Now, this is quite an interesting development. It tells us that there's a generational change going on amongst young American Jews, and I think we've got to get to work to develop that in a constructive way.
Oh, Kathy.
Yeah.
Since I passed on my first one, Joel is exactly right. I'm sure everybody is aware of the, in the last 2 years, 2 years ago, two American professors, University of Chicago and Harvard, John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, published first an article in the London Review of Books and then a much, much more detailed, thorough book in September last year on the Israel lobby. Of course, it's aroused huge controversy. But I think they had it exactly right. The people who want to deny the power of the lobby want to say that in the dog wagging who wags the dog's tail argument, that the U.S. is the big power and Israel is just a little poor, almost helpless instrument of U.S. policy. I think it's almost the opposite. It certainly is a mixture of the Israeli tail wagging the U.S. dog because of the importance of the lobby, because of the power of the lobby, AIPAC, to influence U.S. foreign policy and to influence the discourse. I mean, as Joel mentioned in his talk, we have it at the AIPAC convention last week, just a few days ago, 3 presidential candidates. At that point there were 3, now there are only 2, competing with each other to see who could be more pro-Israeli. The same was true in 2004. John Kerry backed off from all of the semi-neutral statements he made about the wall, for instance, being an obstacle to peace. He got attacked by by the Israel lobby, and he backed off so that he became, throughout the rest of the campaign, just as pro-Israeli as George Bush, which is really going some distance. And so the lobby is very important, and money is very important. The lobby is supported by, I mean, it's almost taboo subject to talk about Jews with money, but pro-Israelis with money. They're not all Jews, but that's very important, and that's something we need to struggle against. I think it's come to the point where it's much more possible to change the discourse in Israel, to open dialogue on one state, which Amaya is trying to do, one state versus 2 states, than it is in the United States. But I have some sense, because of the trend, the poll that Joel mentioned about younger American Jews being less tied to Israel and caring less in an existential sense about what happens to Israel. This is an opening for organizations like Code Z and people like us and Ali's ad hoc group on one state to keep sort of poking at U.S. Foreign policy. It's a very difficult job, because the lobby did not just gain its importance during the Bush administration with the neocons and the Christian Zionists. It's been going on since Woodrow Wilson, at least, and it's been getting more and more powerful as each decade, each year has gone on. but it has major weaknesses also, and we just need to keep struggling against it. Ali?
Well, I want to take, I agree with much of what you've said, Kathleen and Joel, but I want to point out some differences. I think there's a danger of ascribing too much power to what we call the Israeli lobby, and there's even some debate about what that is. I don't argue that Israel is simply the tool of U.S. foreign policy, nor do I think it would be right, and I don't think anyone said that the U.S. is completely controlled by Israel. Kathleen, I think you said that it's a mixture. But I think there's a danger that we can sort of disempower ourselves by saying that this lobby is all-powerful, when there's plenty of evidence that it isn't. And I'll give you some recent examples. Now, in the just completed Democratic primary process, the candidate that was certainly perceived by pro-Israel organizations as being the most solidly pro-Israeli is Hillary Clinton. She lost. So, and she also won, according to most exit polls, the vast majority of Jewish votes. So neither the power of the Israeli lobby nor the power of Jewish voters determined the outcome of the Democratic primary. Now, we've seen Barack Obama go through this process of becoming the, saying all the things AIPAC wants to hear, but nevertheless, he hasn't allayed all the doubts that exist about his pro-Israel bona fides. I think he will be as pro-Israeli as he says. I think that we should take him at his word. But I'm talking about the perceptions that exist out there. Another example is just a few days ago, Shaul Mofaz, one of the Israeli security cabinet, a former member of the former chief of the Israeli army and former defense minister, said that it was becoming unavoidable that Israel would attack Iran and do so. Incidentally, he's born in Iran, but anyway, he said it's becoming unavoidable that Israel would attack Iran and would do this in coordination with the United States. He was very quickly slapped down by the United States. I don't know if you saw the statements coming out saying, no, this is inaccurate. So the point is that the Israel lobby doesn't get everything the Israel lobby wants. Nevertheless, there is this extraordinary imbalance of power between Palestinians and Israelis, and how do we begin to address that? Do we just sort of plug away forever at the American political system? I think that that is a strategy that can't get us where we need to go in the time we need to go. And therefore, I think we have to look at the alternative strategies of civil resistance, particularly boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Because this is a nonviolent, principled means with a long history in the civil rights struggle, in the anti-apartheid struggle, in the Save Darfur movement of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And we've heard all the arguments that say, well, boycott isn't nice, and it's not nice to isolate Israelis because they'll only feel more vulnerable. But I'd argue that nothing will concentrate the minds of Israelis more on losing the privilege they have to oppress Palestinians, to operate a system of apartheid, and yet pay no price for that in the world. Nothing will concentrate their minds more, as it did with white South Africans, Afrikaners, than that loss of privilege. And it's, if we don't want to see violence on the ground, and I oppose violence, I agree with Joel that the movement should be nonviolent, then we have to provide an alternative. And boycott, divestment, and sanctions has been called for by hundreds of Palestinian civil society organizations. You can go and read the appeal and see the latest things that are going on in that movement at the website of PACB, the Palestinian boycott campaign at pacbi.org, and learn how people are implementing this around the world.
Can I just comment briefly?
We have 4 questions in 5 minutes.
Real quick, though, because it's really so important. First of all, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I don't think we've given that issue time, and you're totally right. Boycott, divestment, sanctions is foundational. But I just want to say one thing about the lobby. Hillary Clinton lost, yes, and she was the favorite of the Israel lobby, yes, And the big reason she lost was that she was wedded to the Iraq War. And there is, as a result of the connivance of the lobby and the neocons in the Iraq War, that has broken out a significant struggle within U.S. ruling elites, which also has devolved into the struggle, the balance of power within the Israel lobby itself. You have this J Street phenomena, which is not, by my lights, a good thing, but it's a sort of a reaction against the realist imperialists like Mearsheimer and Wald. I mean, Mearsheimer and Wald is a revenge or the resurgence of realist foreign policy against the Bush aggressive, hyperpower foreign policy. And so you're seeing this kind of breakup of the consensus within the Israeli lobbies themselves, and I think that's one reason Obama has pulled ahead of Hillary Clinton. On the other hand, this should not be seen as anything more than an opening for yet more struggle, but I think the main struggle should be at BDS levels. I quite agree.
I want to join one really last word, to join what Alice says, and if I'm like representing the Israelis here, or this is my role in this panel, so I want to call as Israeli for you to support this boycott, and I think the boycott will help us to bring change in Israel. And I think this is a very, very important tool that you can do.
All right. I apologize to whoever questions now get clipped, but you can besiege the speakers as they try to leave. And I think I'm going to end with this one, and then I will try, as to the best of my ability, to sum up what we've done here. I think this is a great question to end with. I've seen people with different views than those of the panelists end up self-censoring rather than expressing their views or confronting those with your perspectives. How can people who don't share your ideas engage in conversation with you? And I think we have 5 minutes while you're speechless for 30 seconds. I think that's an important question. How do you bring people to the table who have, in fact, erased the topic you are here to discuss?
I just say very quickly, from my perspective, I tried to do it by putting my ideas down in a book in the most open way, and to say that I'm not offering you all the answers. What I'm offering is a set of questions and ideas I have, and inviting the broadest discussion on questions that have been suppressed and censored. And I often feel that I'm on the margins, so it's strange the question makes it sound as if I'm part of a group that somehow controls the terms of the discussion, when I often feel that I'm kind of nipping at the heels of those who do. But I think it's only with some open-mindedness and empathy for each other that we can begin to break through the taboos that have shielded Zionism from true examination for so long.
I think what I do is first to encourage a lot of criticism and being critique about the Israelis' history and politics, and I'm doing it mainly in all kind of educational work and discussion with people. And first I want to bring that knowledge or that shield that Israel was hiding under it, and the knowledge that was being hidden from us Israelis in front into the discussion. And I'm encouraging the people to be critical for what I bring and for what they grow up on. And I think this kind of a dialogue is promoting a discussion.
When I speak, I say, I have very strong views, and I don't expect you all to, or many of you, to agree with them. But one view I feel very dogmatic about is that we need open discussion of this subject, and we don't have it, and that we need to create a forum where these ideas that have been tabooed, and they're severely tabooed, can be enunciated. So hear me out. And I find that there is in the minds of people who are not ready to adopt these ideas yet sort of a balance. And times the balance is that the forces hostile to opening their minds are clearly in the preponderance, and that partly depends upon whether they're organized into a Zionist group or a congregation of some sort, which will not even get off the ground. But I've noticed that a lot of people come and what they have are contrary ideas to the established Zionist wisdom, but they're afraid to acknowledge them, even to recognize them in themselves. And I think that the best thing, at least that I can do, is just to give them an example that you don't have to respect these taboos. I mean, I think the biggest positive response I get was when I speak and I say the state of Israel does not have the right to exist. Breath, how can you say that? And then I say, well, no state has the right to exist. Oh, really? And then you take on from there. So, I mean, that sort of thing. Don't respect those taboos and insist upon openness. And we are making a difference. I mean, we can go into that another time. But there is a sea change going on.
I agree with that. I think it's a lot with whatever all three have said. I think in many ways it's a matter of tone of voice. I reacted initially the way Ali did. I think we are the ones who are usually called anti-Semitic, who are attacked for being, bringing up taboo subjects and for, wanting the elimination of Jews or saying that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. But I think we do have an obligation to modulate our tone of voice. I don't think we should pull any punches. I think we should use words like oppression, theft of land, racism, exactly. But I think we also need to make clear that what we're not talking about pushing Jews into the sea. We're talking about reconciliation. Both Ali's and Joel's book, despite the title Overcoming Zionism, Joel was very conciliatory, wrote in tones of reconciliation, both books, and that's what we need. You're being signaled.
I'm being signaled. Okay, and I have that terrible task of summing up. Although I'm just thinking, maybe by way of starting, that I actually disagree with Joel. I do think states have a right to exist. I think they're administrative conveniences. They're not God-given, but they are the way we currently distribute rights and the benefits of individual and collective liberties. So I think for me, I would place my emphasis more on doing that justly. But let me see if I can do this. We've talked today about the one-state solution as a possibility for the reconciliation of a very long conflict. And I think some of the themes that have emerged over this discussion and the very nice questions that came in to propel it further are that the nature, first, what kind of opposition is there to this, to even the discussion of the notion of a one-state solution, and the feeling that that opposition is in fact systemic, and that is part of the challenge that faces those who would promote it. As Joel put it, is a useful idiocy for politicians, a great expression. And it is, I think, also something we did not talk about was that it has led to a certain amount of despair among those who might think otherwise, right? There's a sense that there is something so inviolable about the two-state approach that in a context of weariness and despair, it gets harder and harder to promote other options. I think I've heard also, though, that it is feasible to start breaking that wall of inviolability, and that there are, in fact, very myriad ways to start. Amaya talked about just really work on the ground among Israelis, recovering memory, changing terminology, all the way to Ali's arguments for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I think for bringing back the Nakba as a part of common vocabulary, for talking about the right of return, for talking about equal rights, for talking about equal access to water, land, courts, culture, rights to culture, mobility, education, and ultimately hope. I think I agree very much with Ali, and I think everyone has restated this in one way or another, that what we have on the ground right now is a one-state solution. What we need is a one-state solution that is just for all of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.